Good afternoon, all my West Coast friends, and good evening, everybody who's here with me on the East Coast. Really excited to be learning with such a large group and such a motivated group of the learners. Just wanted to say something about Professor Epstein's introduction. You know, he said that if you don't want to hear his shtick, you shouldn't come to Rav Michael's lecture. And I just want to suggest come 5 minutes late and come to the lecture, because Rav Michael and all of my Hadar faculty colleagues are really great, and you should really try your hardest not to miss a second of any of their teaching. Okay.
I agree. So to preclude, you should come. Ari always takes about 10 minutes with shtick at the beginning. So I'm taking over from him. You should come after the 10 minutes then. Very good. Great.
Okay, great. So continuing our conversation about strategy, tonight we're going to be talking about privilege, right? How to navigate our privilege. And I want to be very clear about what we are not talking about, because some of you may already be thinking in this direction. What we are not talking about is redistribution of wealth. And the reason why we're not talking about redistribution of wealth, not only because it happens not to be the topic, but because first of all, it's a worthy topic in and of itself. It's a different topic, and the Torah really has a very complex ideas about it. And in some sense, the conversation about privilege is a little bit more approachable. And we don't really, by the time you subtract the shtick and subtract the questions, we're about 40 minutes of time together. It's too large a conversation for us to have together now. But the real reason why we're not talking about redistribution of wealth is because that's actually a somewhat easy problem to solve, right? If you think about privilege in terms of what is in your bank account, cash is fungible. I could go from a rich person to a poor person with a click of a mouse, and I could transfer all of my money to CSP, right? And I would be a great donor and I would be poor. And the problem of my wealth versus your wealth will be solved. Okay, but when we're talking about privilege in its broadest experience and expression, it's much, much, much more complex. Okay, to take a really silly example, my husband is well over 6 feet. I am well under 5 feet. Okay, that's not fair, right? But it's impossible for me to cut off his legs and attach them to my body, right? You simply cannot redistribute certain kinds of privilege. And to be, I think, more serious, just to think that there are many people in this world who are blessed with a lot of children, and there are many people in this world who struggle with infertility. And the solution to that problem is not, oh, well, if you have 4 kids and I have none, I'll adopt 2 of yours, right? You could sort of imagine, well, let's redistribute the wealth. But redistributing the wealth is actually not really possible when we're talking about privilege in its broadest and I would say really deepest sense, right? And so when I'm talking about privilege, I'm not only talking about sort of what I have and you don't have, which is of course, extremely important, but also what I have that makes you feel like you don't have. Right. And it's that extra element of it's not really about something that is necessarily quantifiable. Right. But there's some way in which my life, when you encounter it, makes you feel a certain way. And our conversation today is really going to be about being cognizant of that and trying to navigate that sensitively. Right. So if you don't take anything else, right, from this conversation, right, just trying to have our antennae up, right? And to really realize what we have that other people don't, or that other people think that they don't, right? And therefore might be in a pained relationship with us that we may not even be aware of is extremely important. And just knowing that, right? Just raising that in our consciousness, Dayenu, right, would be enough. But we have plenty more to talk about. So we're not going to end at the Dayenu moment. Professor Epstein chatted out the source sheet. I am going to share my screen. So folks can either scroll along at their own pace, or you can follow along with me. Okay. here we are at the very top, the Hadar logo. Go to hadar.org and see all the amazing things that you can learn there. We're at pride and privilege. How do we sensitively navigate and appreciate having more than others, right? And the word that pays here in this description is sensitively. We are going to go through, I think, three main areas in this source sheet of a kind of approach to this problem. The first area that we're going to touch on is a concept called lo'eg l'rush. Lo'eg means to mock, and rush is a term used for someone who is impoverished. Okay, and so the first sources that we are going to look at are going to talk about the problem of mocking someone who has less than you. And we're going to see the example for lo'eg l'rush is going to be, I think, very surprising and hopefully very instructive. Okay, so we're starting in our first source, the Gemara in Brachot 18a. Is it not taught that one should not walk in a cemetery with their tefillin on their head or a Sefer Torah in their arm that they are reading? Right, and these are both examples, right, of Torah on your arm, because your tefillin are also Torah on your body, okay? And if they do so, right, if somebody walks in a cemetery, sort of displaying their ability to study Torah, they violate this principle, this verse from Mishlei, lo'eg l'rush, cheref osehu, one who mocks the poor, disparages the one who made him. This is an extremely interesting paradigm for this idea of not disparaging, right, someone who has less. First, right, the kind of privilege that we're talking about here, right, the kind of uneven distribution of wealth that we're talking about is not material, okay, it's mitzvot. That one person has the ability to do mitzvot, and another person has lost the ability to do mitzvot. I can no longer wear tefillin, I can no longer learn Torah. That's the first thing I would say that's interesting. Okay, what's sort of more shocking is, wait, the example that you're talking about here of the person who I'm not supposed to disparage is a person who is dead. Right. When we think about the people who we need to be sensitive to, we don't generally think about the feelings of the dead. We generally think about the feelings of the people who are alive. Okay, so we're going to need to tease out, we're going to need to explore a little bit more why it is that the paradigm here is mitzvot and people who have passed away. Okay, and so in the continuation of the story, we're going to see some of this come up. Okay, so we have this, right, we have this original teaching that gives us this law about not walking with a certain attitude, with a certain display, okay, when we're in the cemetery. And then we have a story that kind of continues this idea. And I also just really, I do think it's significant, right, that we have two examples here, a Sefer Torah that you're using and a tefillin that you're wearing, because there's an association of tefillin with pride. Tefillin is actually discussed in the Midrash as being a type of crown, a diadem, okay? And so there is this sense of, like, when you're wearing tefillin, you're kind of showing off your relationship with God. It's not unlike, a flashy engagement ring. Okay, when you wear it, you're showing off, right? In some sense, physical, material wealth, but also my spouse, right, values me enough to have spent, 2 or 3 months' salary, whatever the totally made up rule of De Beers, to give me this ring. Okay, so the tefillin really is a way of displaying pride. Okay, and so we're saying, don't walk around so proudly in the Beit HaKfarot, in the cemetery, where all of these people are lying and they are not able to engage in mitzvot. They are not able to themselves, right, wear the tefillin and display and experience their relationship with God. So now we have a cute story with Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Yonatan strolling in the cemetery, okay? And the techelet, the blue strings of Rabbi Yonatan's tzitzit, were dragging on the graves, okay? He was, if you're imagining their cloaks as being long cloaks, okay? So then the tzitzit are going to be at the very end, the hem of the garment. So it's actually natural. It's sort of default that as you're walking, the strings that are tied to the hem of your garment are going to drag on the floor, are going to drag on the graves. Okay, when we think of talit katan, right, the little tzitzit that we wear on our bodies, or a talit that is, a kind of shawl that we wear on our shoulders, that's not actually how the original experience, or at least the Mishnaic, early rabbinic experience of tzitzit and talit was, right? They wore four-cornered garments. Those were their clothes, okay? Think about a toga, think about a sari, right? They are not wearing special, ritual garments. They're wearing regular garments and putting ritual fringes on them. Okay, so Rabbi Yonatan is really just walking the ordinary way that he would walk in the ordinary clothes that he would wear. And nevertheless, Rabbi Chia says to him, no, lift them up, right? I want you to tuck in your tzitzit. I don't want you to allow them to drag in this natural way on the graves, so that they don't say, right? And then they here are the dead people in their graves. They should not say, tomorrow they are coming to join us, but now they disparage us. Okay, so we're imagining, right, that the dead are so insulted, they're being like a little bit fresh, right? They're being a little bit rude. Look at these guys, bragging about their ability to do mitzvot. Don't they realize they're going to be dead too, right? How dare they treat us with such disrespect? And then Rabbi Yonatan said, what I think some of you might be thinking, these are dead people, okay? Why are we imagining them with this awareness? And why are we imagining them having this conversation? Okay, they're dead. So Rabbi Yonatan said to Rabbi Chia, did they really know that much? It says, V'hametim einam yodim me'uma. The dead don't know anything, right? Once you're dead, you're dead. So I'm sorry for those of you for whom that's news, but that's game over. So then Rabbi Chia responds to him, if you read it, you didn't review it. And if you reviewed it, you didn't read it a third time. Okay, so Rabbi Chia is also a little bit fresh. And he says to him, don't bring me this verse, because there's more to it. You're not really understanding it. Because even if you read it a third time, they didn't explain it to you. For the living know that they will die. These are the righteous who are called living even in their death. Okay, this explanation at the end is a little bit difficult to understand. I'm going to try to simplify it as much as possible. Essentially, Rabbi Chia says to him, sometimes we refer to the righteous as alive, even when they're dead, and we refer to the wicked as dead, even when they're alive, right? By which he means to say, dead and alive are not actual physical states, right, that we necessarily know the truth of. Dead and alive are just a subjective experience, right, that we have. How can you say for certain that the dead don't know anything? We're not talking about dead people, actual dead people when they say they don't know anything. We're talking about metaphorical dead people when they say that they don't know anything. And therefore, actual dead people, we still have the possibility that if they're righteous, right, and only the righteous are going to care about not being able to wear tzitzit anymore, right? So if they're righteous, they're going to be insulted. They're going to be hurt that you're walking around with your tzitzit dragging on the grave. Okay. So what's extremely, extremely important here is to understand and to appreciate that the need to be sensitive, okay, does not extend to people who we know are going to be hurt. The need to be sensitive extends to anyone we have the remotest chance of a possibility that they might be insulted. Okay, that's, I think, the real sort of core reason why we're talking about the dead. Because the dead are the people that are the easiest for me to dismiss and say, they don't care, they don't know, I don't need to worry about how I interact with them. And it's like, no, right? You actually do need to worry about how you interact with the dead. And to use, Talmudic jargon, kal v'chomer, even more so, you're going to need to be sensitive to other people who are alive. Okay? There is no one who you can say about them, I don't care about how they perceive me. I don't care if my behavior hurts them. Okay. And now the second element, which I think is extremely, extremely important, right? And it goes back to this idea that privilege, right, is not only something that applies to things that are redistributable, but it also applies to things that aren't redistributable, right? But also the privilege that I need to care about, right, that I need to be sensitive about how I display, could even be Torah and mitzvot, right? It could even be the thing that I should be the most proud of. We're actually saying here, don't be so proud. Don't be so on display. You are going to hurt someone else's feelings, right? The most neutral, the most positive. Nothing is exempt from the requirement that we have to really be careful about how we display, right? And the last element that I want to make sure that you get out of this story before we go to the commentary on this story is this sort of naturalness of Rabbi Yonatan. He's just wearing his clothes, okay? And in the times of the Mishnah, rabbis wore their tefillin of their head all day long, okay? So these people are wearing their normal clothes. They're not trying to engage in some sort of conspicuous consumption. They're not trying to make other people feel bad. They're just doing what they think is right. They're just being who they are rabbis, and rabbis wear talit and tefillin. That's what it is. They're being yelled at, right? They're being told, you're not being sensitive. You're not being aware of the way your natural state of being can be painful to somebody else. Okay. I want us to look at the Rosh here. The Rosh is not a commentary on stories. He's a legal commentary. He's one of the first Ashkenazi legal decisors, and he is going to explain and also expand and translate this image. And it is specifically regarding tefillin and other similar mitzvot that it is prohibited to wear or perform in the cemetery. But tzitzit, which is a mitzvah for one's clothes, it is permitted since one can't strip off their clothes when they walk in a cemetery. Okay. This is a little bit more complicated, right? But I want to make sure that we understand. Right? The Rosh comes in and he says, this is a law. So I need to be clear with you about when you can wear and when you can't wear, what you can wear and what you can't wear. Okay, and so he says tefillin is an extra. It is kind of conspicuous consumption of mitzvot, and you can't have your tefillin displayed. But tzitzit, back in the day, you only had one garment. And that garment usually had 4 corners, and therefore that garment usually had tzitzit, okay? And so what we're not saying is when you go into the cemetery, you have to be naked. We're not saying that, since one can't strip off their clothes when they walk in a cemetery, okay? And so then he says, and the proof of this is that Rabbi Chia told Rabbi Yonatan to lift up his tzitzit rather than take them off. So we see that they were wearing tzitzit on their primary garment. So a person would only have to make sure to lift up the actual fringes, the tzitzit themselves. But as far as our talit, right, and he is in the Middle Ages, but his clothing style is actually much closer to ours, right? And he's already in a period of time where people do not wear togas in Europe, right? People are wearing tailored clothes, and if we're going to wear a talit, it's going to be an extra, ritual garment, that as for our talit, since we don't wear them as a garment, but do so only to fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzit, it would be equivalent to tefillin, where loeg l'Rosh would be a relevant issue. Okay, right. So the Rosh is doing two things that kind of pull in opposite directions, right? One is to say there's actually a limit to how careful you need to be. Okay, when I say you can't have your tzitzit dragging on the graves, you can't wear your tefillin, okay, but I'm not telling you you have to go around naked, that you can't have any clothes on because your clothes are going to have tzitzit, right? We need to kind of find this middle path where you're allowed to wear your normal clothes, but you can't wear them in a way where your tzitzit are hitting people in the face, right? Where they're dragging on the headstones, okay? But if it is an extra thing, right? If it is your tefillin, if it is your talit, which you're only wearing for a ritual purpose, then right, you would have to take them off in order to be sensitive. And so what's really important to appreciate here in the Rosh is the kind of dance that he's doing, where he's also asking you to acknowledge, well, is it really just the natural way that you're dressing? Or is there a little bit of showing off there that you don't always pay attention to and that you don't want to acknowledge, but I'm asking you to acknowledge, right? Because he says sometimes we're talking about your clothes. You don't have to strip off your clothes. We're not saying don't have clothes. We're not saying don't have wealth. We're not saying don't have children, don't have happiness. We're not saying that. But what we are saying is you need to actually evaluate and pay close attention to whether or not there is a little bit of showing off that you're doing, even if it's in the most native and natural way. Even if you're not doing it in order to show off, in order to hurt someone, you're doing it for your own reasons of personal piety, you need to be sensitive, you need to be aware. And I wanted to just briefly, I think, raise up, right, the image of tzitzit is not just that specific mitzvah itself of, wearing fringes on your garment, but it is a mitzvah that stands in for all of the other mitzvot. Okay, so in the psukim in the Torah and Bamidbar, they will be tzitzit for you, these fringes, right, on your garments, and you will see them and you will remember all of the mitzvot of God, and you will do that. Okay, what is happening when my tzitzit drag on the grave of this dead person? I think I'm just wearing tzitzit. But for the person who is in the grave, that tzitzit comes with all of its resonance. And I'm going to use this word, intentionally, with all of its baggage. I think it's just a mitzvah. But to the person who is not able to fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzit, they're more sensitive to the fact that tzitzit represents all of the mitzvot. And when I go in to the cemetery wearing this garment and allowing it to drag on the graves, essentially what I'm saying is, you don't get to do any mitzvot. I don't mean to say that, okay? But the person who's perceiving it has this whole wealth of associations. We know this about ourselves. This happens to me a lot when I watch a movie, right? The movie is about whatever it's about. But my experience watching the movie is always, it reminds me of this thing, which reminds me of that thing, which reminds me of the third thing. And all of a sudden I'm crying at like My Little Pony, right? It's some child's movie. But why am I so upset? It's not about what's in the movie. It's not about the actual story that's being told. It's about the thing that triggers, the thing that triggers, the thing that triggers, the thing that it triggers, that hits me in the deepest place. Okay, and now nobody's trying to move me to that deep place. But we, as sort of interactors with the world and interactors with other people, need to understand that we can sometimes set off this cascade of feelings that we don't necessarily intend to set off. Okay. And the last little piece that we're going to do on this specific section of Loeg l'Rosh is the Talmud Yerushalmi. Okay, we were just in the Babylonian Talmud, now we're in the Palestinian Talmud. And Rabbi Zera said in the name of Rabbi Abba Bar Yirmiyah, a person shouldn't go to a cemetery and, okay, in our first text, it was, don't go into a cemetery and wear your beautiful tzitzit and your, crown of tefillin. Here in the Yerushalmi and Brachot, what are you not supposed to be doing? You should not go to the bathroom there. And if he does so, about him, the verse says, one who mocks the poor disparages the one who made him. Okay, now one way to understand this Yerushalmi is you're taking a crap on somebody's grave, right? That's disparaging him. But if we read the Gemara here, in light of the first Gemara we saw, okay, maybe, right, what disparages the person who is dead is not that it's poop, okay, that he's disgusted by poop, but that he is jealous of poop, right? Lo Eid Lo Rosh is saying, you don't have a body that functions, I have a body that functions, okay? And so now we sort of have the total, 180, right? Where the first example that we saw is, it's so ethereal, right? It's so positive. You might think I would never have to tone down my performance of mitzvot, and then we're actually told, actually you do have to tone it down. You do have to make it a little bit more subtle for the sake of this dead person. And then on the other side, we're saying, and also something that you don't think of as something positive. You think of as something disgusting. You take it for granted. Not everybody takes it for granted. Go into a hospital, and talk to somebody who is unable to vacate their bowels when they want to on their own accord. And they will tell you, I am jealous of you and your ability to poop. So don't come into my hospital room and go into the bathroom there and flush really loudly, right? Because that actually makes me jealous. Okay, and so this whole idea of the mocking of the poor, we also have to be extremely expansive in our definition of privilege. If we have something that somebody else doesn't have, even if it's not something that we think of as being particularly positive, it falls under this rubric, and we need to be really careful. Okay, we're moving into the Gemara in Ta'anit. And the word Ta'anit means fasting. Okay, so unsurprisingly, we're going to start with a conversation about fasting, but we're going to quickly move into a conversation about what it means to display an ayin hara. Okay, now some of you are familiar with the evil eye, the ayin hara. It is a kind of superstition, but we're going to talk about it. We're going to unpack it a little bit so we understand why it's significant. Okay, so our rabbis taught in a Breita, one who goes from a place where they are not fasting to a place where they are fasting, he fasts with them. Okay, so it used to be that communities, when they were in distress, would take a fast upon themselves, and you could have that, in the Bay Area they're fasting, and in Los Angeles they're not fasting. Okay, I've just exhausted all of my California geographical knowledge. Okay, and one who goes from a place where they are fasting to a place where they are not fasting completes his fast, meaning you always have to be more stringent, you always have to fast. If he forgot the fast and ate and drank, okay, you broke the fast. It happens a lot when somebody is fasting and you're just so accustomed to eating or drinking when you're hungry or thirsty. You do it by accident, and now you're not fasting. He should not display this publicly, and he should not indulge in luxuries. Okay, you're no longer fasting. Do you need to go and have that hot fudge sundae and eat it in front of the people who have who are still fasting? As it says, Yaakov said to his sons, why should you display yourselves? Yaakov said to his sons, do not display yourselves when you are satiated. Right, the context here is when Yaakov's sons are going to get food from Egypt, and people in Canaan do not have a lot of food. Okay, so Yaakov said to his sons, do not display yourselves when you are satiated, not before Esav, not before Ishmael, so that they not be jealous of you. Right, you don't want to create a situation where you are showing off what you have that other people don't have, and they will, so that they not be jealous of you. Okay, and the Gemara of Pesachim specifically uses the language of an evil eye. The sages taught in a Breita, one who benefits from selling rods or jugs will never see a sign of blessing. Okay, kanim here is like sticks. What is the reason for this? Since their volume is great, the eye can see them, right? And it really means the evil eye affects them. Okay, so there's this notion, right, that if I have something that is just a huge display, okay, even though what we're talking about here are sticks and jugs, right? They're actually not expensive items, but they're flashy because there's so many of them. Okay, since their volume is great, there's going to be some sort of evil eye. Okay, and what the evil eye seems to be, it purely is attention, that there's something negative about attention, right? And I think the mechanism here, we're going to see the Maharsha is going to talk about it, right, where he specifically says, right, bracha is only found, right, blessing is only found in something hidden because of the evil eye of a person. Okay, the evil eye, where is the thinking of being some sort of demon, he makes it very clear the evil eye of a person is not the same as alternately that the demons should not have power over it. Okay, so there's something here about the evil eye of a person. Okay, and what it is sorry to use that kind of language, is when I have my wealth and my privilege and whatever I have on display, other people see it, and that triggers some kind of negative reaction. Now, I don't know exactly, right, what's happening on a supernatural scale, right? But I think what's happening on a natural scale is, as soon as somebody sees that you have something, they ask, why do you deserve that and I don't, right? And it causes this kind of judgment that kind of digs at the foundations of the sort of, people are questioning your right to it, and it kind of invites a conversation that says, oh, well, actually, maybe you don't have rights to it, right? And so there's something about when you display your wealth that it invites people to say, this person should not have that wealth. And again, I'm using the term wealth in the broadest sense. And in that way, it kind of starts to bring it back, starts to bring it down. Okay, so the two examples that we saw so far, Lo'eg l'Rash, mocking the poor, and this idea of the evil eye, okay, in both of these cases, what we see is, this is actually not about me trying to have some sort of conspicuous consumption, try to have some display. That's not the problem, because we already know that that's the problem. I don't need to be taught about not deliberately trying to make people jealous. Okay, both of the examples that we saw are things that I think of as neutral. I have to be really careful about behaving in the most natural way, because when other people see it, they're going to be hurt. Other people, that's where the evil eye comes from. Other people, because they see it and it hurts them. It invites them to criticize. It invites them to interact with me in a way that they don't want to interact with me, and I don't want to be interacted with. Okay, we only have we're a little less than 7 minutes left, because I want to make sure we have at least 10 minutes of questions. So we're going to go into the next source. And the importance of the next source, there's a lot going on in it, but the importance of the next source is where we're going to see that he also offers some positive advice, right? So far, I haven't said it explicitly, but I think you sort of see the thread is, well, if you have it, don't flaunt it, right? And be extra careful about not flaunting, right? Even when it seems like it's something neutral. Okay, so my great rabbinic sage advice for how do we navigate having more than other people is A, expand your categories of what it means to have more than other people. Be more sensitive than you think you need to be, and B, hide it. Okay, it's actually very simple advice. And when you start to feel like, well, I shouldn't have to hide it, right? Then you remember that the first example of something that you're going to hide is your tefillin and your talit. Okay, so if your great sages have to hide their tefillin, you could hide, I don't know, your expensive vacation or the pictures of your tons of grandchildren, when your friend who doesn't have any grandchildren comes over. Like maybe that's a good time to not have all of the photos on display. Okay, we're in Orchot Tzadikim, which is also a late medieval Musar text, and it's anonymous, which I think is very appropriate for Musar texts. Okay, he says, the early sages used to pray, may we not have envy against others, and may others not envy us. Now, why would they pray that others should not possess this quality more than other evil qualities? Okay, so if we recognize that being jealous is not a good quality, why do I pray that other people not be jealous? When I don't pray that other people not be angry, and I don't pray that other people not be mean or arrogant, right? There's something special, something unique. Why am I praying that you not be jealous? That's odd. I don't pray for all of your other qualities. And he says, this is the explanation of the matter. Many people cause others to envy them and covet their possessions. Therefore, they used to pray for others because maybe they were the cause of envy in others. And the Torah has said, do not put a stumbling block before the blind. Okay, so essentially, right, the Orchot Tzadikim says, envy isn't like other negative qualities. Envy doesn't exist in a vacuum. Envy never comes for no cause. If somebody is envious of you, you gave them cause to be envious. And therefore, you need to pray that they not be envious because it is your fault. Right? It's incredible. We don't usually say this about qualities. Right? If you have an anger management problem and I do something that provokes you, that's on you. But there's something about envy, right, that's so hard for people to control, right? And I would say is actually often tied to our kind of most vulnerable selves, and is tied to so much of what we want and can't have, and is so painful, right? That it doesn't work to just say to somebody, don't be envious. You actually have to say to other people, don't make that person envious. Because in some ways, that's the only way it's going to work. That envy is so natural, right? Envy is so hard for us to work on that we just need to live in a society where people try not to make other people envious. Therefore, it is good for a man not to wear really nice or expensive garments. But he says straight out, don't dress in a way that's going to make other people envious. Neither he nor his wife nor his children. And so with food and other matters, so that others will not envy him, right? And again, we're not telling someone don't have children, don't have a fabulous wife. We're saying try not to have it in other people's face. And let whoever who has been bestowed upon by the blessed Creator benefit others with his possessions, rich or poor. Let him conduct himself pleasantly with them and deal kindly with them. This is, I think, a very intuitive statement, but it's not a statement that we often are always in tune with. We recently spoke about the evil eye, right? And the evil eye, the problem with the evil eye is somebody sees what you have and they are resentful of it. They are frustrated by it. They are hurt by it. It has nothing to do with you, but it was triggered by you. And it might end up having a negative effect on you, either through metaphysics or, just through natural causes. Okay, and the Orchot Tzadikim provides this extremely sweet and extremely natural, right, way to combat this. You don't want other people to be jealous of what you have. Make them beneficiaries of what you have, right? Bring them into your privilege, right? As opposed to making them feel like resentful that you have something that they don't have, right? And I don't think that he's talking about giving away everything that you have so that you're poor and now other people are rich, right? He's not talking about redistribution of wealth, as I mentioned at the opening of this class, right? But he's talking about conducting yourself pleasantly and dealing kindly, right? There are people who have way more than us, but the way that they are with their privilege, right, is just so generous and so sweet that we don't begrudge them for having what they have, because we don't have a narrative of they don't deserve it. Why do they have it when I don't? Because we could see, right, that even if a person isn't inherently deserving of any of these things, this person is working to being deserving, right? This person wants their wealth to be a source of, joy and benefit for other people, and not just for themselves. The last thing that we're going to say before we turn to questions is just based on this little snippet from the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. We're not going to go into it. But the last piece that I want to make sure to get across is also somewhat tied to the dead people introduction, right? Which is essentially, sometimes we think, why would that person be jealous of me? I have 4 children, they have 4 children. I have a 3,000 square foot house, they have a 3,000 square foot house. I have a PhD, they have a PhD, right? So why do I need to worry about displaying myself in front of that person? They have essentially the same thing that I do. Okay, and so the backdrop in that Gemara in Brachot is that, in Avodah Zarah, right, is that person says, well, God is only going to be jealous of another God. And right, a person is only jealous of their colleague, of their peer. But I think this is extremely, extremely important to be cognizant of. I am not jealous of Mark Zuckerberg. I'm not jealous of Elon Musk. Those people are not in my range. They are like, fantasy characters to me. Who am I jealous of? My friend who has the same exact apartment as me, but she has an extra closet. I'm killing myself, right, over that extra closet, because we're supposed to be the same, but she has that little edge, right? We're in the same class, and I got a 98 and she got a 98, but a little smiley face on the paper. That's gonna be the thing that turns me green, right? And so what I think is like such an important last sort of lesson to take from this, right, is the dead person, right, is some example of the kind of person who we think they don't know, right, that they're in a different position than us. They're dead, they don't know, so we don't have to worry about their feelings. And then I think the very dominant narrative that we have in our own lives is we're all in the same bracket, right? So there's no reason for that person to be jealous of me. They have what I have. Right. I think the final lesson that we need to learn is those are exactly the people that are the most jealous of you, that you are subconsciously keeping up with the Joneses in competition with them. And they might have a perception of you, as being really lucky and being really fortunate and maybe undeserving. And those are the people that we need to be the most sensitive to. Trying not to over display our wealth, again, in all senses of the word, and to the extent that we can't hide or don't want to hide what we have, really approaching what we have with humility and trying to share it and interact with other people, in a way that makes them want us to have what we have, as opposed to resent us for having what we have. Okay, we have the chat is open. And Professor Epstein, when you find a good fish, send it my way.
I want to throw out a fish of my own for a second.
Okay, great.
Which is to say this was wonderful. And one of the things it brings to mind is the pervasive problem that social media of all kinds creates for us in this respect nowadays. It's all of this stuff is amplified. I mean, your thoughts and your prescriptions are very wise, and one wishes that one could implement them in life, but social media is always an abrasion, and I don't want to speak like I don't want to display, right? And I don't want to speak like someone who has a prescription. But I got off social media a couple of years ago completely. And while it hasn't solved the problem, it does go a long way. You just, you're not looking at what everybody else has all the time. And your last point was particularly apropos. So let me look at the questions here. I see, just to respond, Linda said she can't open the PDF. We'll manage to get it sent to you. There's a question from Sivan. Sivan said, wouldn't there be envy when privileges benefit the poor? So in other words, it's the question of affirmative action, right? If we do affirmative action, not wealth distribution, but affirmative action to help the disenfranchised and the previously underprivileged, doesn't that create a whole other dimension of problems?
Yeah, so I want to respond to both what you said about social media and this the second question. I mean, I know that everybody is thinking about social media if you're on social media in the background, so I don't even feel the need, to say it explicitly. But I will say that I feel that in our current times, where COVID has really highlighted different types of privilege and the way that the same conditions really hit people unevenly. I particularly thinking about a friend of mine who was complaining about how difficult it is for her to manage, right, having a full-time job and having 3 children at home in the pandemic. And that is extremely difficult. And then another friend of mine sort of privately messaged me and she said, but I'm looking for work and I'm going through this pandemic alone. Okay, and so when she complains about how hard it is for her to homeschool her kids because she has a job, it just makes me feel like garbage, right? And it just was like, right, no matter what you say, right, even if you're trying to be self-deprecating, even when you're trying to talk about how hard it is for you, it's going to be the mirror of what is difficult for somebody else.
Yes.
And in terms of the question of can we, I think really what's behind Sivan's question is, can we escape, right, the problem of jealousy? And if we try to sort of make everybody even, is that going to solve the problem? And I think the answer is no, right? And one of the reasons why I didn't want to focus on the questions of redistribution is because I think that the amount that the disparity, right, even if you try to adjust it and even if you try to fix it, is never going to be entirely equal. And I think that's not only the case, just because like you'll never be able to fully get there, but also that what is painful and what's difficult for people, right, is always going to be hard in a different way for everybody else, right? There's no way for you to actually get to the real issue here. The real issue here is not, I have more than you. The real issue is that ayin hara, the evil eye, that when you see what I have, it makes you feel bad, right? And what I think was so interesting about some of the texts that we saw is that instead of blaming you for feeling bad and blaming you for feeling jealous, right, there's some responsibility that I need to take in trying to be as sensitive and modest as I can be. Again, within reason, I'm allowed to wear my clothes. Right? I don't have to go around in rags so that other people aren't jealous of me, but maybe I should make sure that my feet aren't dragging, right? That they aren't kind of in your face. And it's a very difficult tightrope. It's very hard to walk that line, but that's really something that we have to work towards.
Beautiful. Tybal brings up a very charming point, which is the minhag of covering the challah, right? Which actually has to do with something beyond this, but one of the explanations that's traditionally given is so that the kiddush shouldn't be embarrassed, right? Because the kiddush is privileged. So that's a sort of amplification of this idea.
Right, like we don't teach children about being sensitive to the dead. We teach them about being sensitive to the challah, but it's the same, kind of extrapolation that we're hoping children will make.
Yes. So Linda has a good question about the balance between Hiddur mitzvah and not stirring envy, right? So, I want to have a beautiful atara, a beautiful headpiece on my talit, right? Do I do it or do I not? It's said of the Rebbe of Radzin, of Ruzhin, that he had golden slippers with no soles, right? That's the opposite of the problem. You know, what do you do? How do you reconcile the idea that one should perform the mitzvot with a beautiful aesthetic with the idea that one should avoid opportunities for others to become jealous?
Great. So I'll say one thing. I think there's a difference between beautiful and expensive, right? And I think that often when we think about Hidur mitzvah, about amplifying the mitzvah, we think about putting more money into it. And there's a way to put in more money where people don't see it, and there's a way to put in more money where people do see it. And I think that to the extent that we are supposed to invest in mitzvot, it's probably best to invest in a way that is less ostentatious than more. And actually, one of the core examples of Hidur mitzvah, we're out of time, so I'm just going to wrap up quickly with this, is the etrog. And this is something that is huge in certain Hasidic communities. People are paying thousands of dollars for a gross lemon. Okay, it's insane. And I just this year realized what I think is going on there. There's no room for personal expression. Everybody has to take the same fruit, right? And so where am I going to kind of put my energy to kind of stand out and be different and appreciate? It's going to end up being in this kind of financial outlet. And I think that to the extent that we can find ways to like live our lives really for ourselves and put effort and energy and money into what's meaningful to me as opposed to what you're going to be impressed by, right? That is some way that we can try to ameliorate this problem. Although, I don't really think it's escapable. I just think it is something we can be sensitive to.
Well, you brought it to our consciousness, and that is, I think that's the very best that we can do, because it will spur us to some action, hopefully, and what we can't do, we won't do, but it will be present in our consciousness and will be there for us going forward. Speaking of going forward, on this coming Tuesday, January 11th at 12:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 3:30 p.m. Eastern, and 10:30 p.m. Israel, is part one of Dirshuni, a taste of Israeli women's Midrash with Rabbi Avi Kilp and Shirel Horowitz, and we hope you'll join us then. This has been a delight. Thank you, Dena. I've learned much, and I have much to think about in terms of all kinds of interactions going forward. You're truly a gift to us, and here at CSP, you join the ranks of many, many wonderful speakers, and in enriching us in really the only important way to be enriched, which is enrichment of the heart and the soul. So thank you, and thank you all, and look forward to seeing you very, very soon. And God bless us, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Good
Take
night.
care, everyone.
Good night.